Chapter 27, The Marshall Plan. Two signs sat on President Truman's desk. The first sign quoted a man from Truman's home state of Missouri. It said, "Always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest." They were the words of Mark Twain. The second sign said, "The buck stops here," which means the president has the final word and can't blame anyone else for his decisions. Harry Truman had some big decisions to make. Those decisions would profoundly affect Americans and people around the world. In one of the most important of his decisions, he persuaded the American people to act generously to the defeated nations. What Harry Truman had in mind had never been done before in the history of the world. Truman knew how defeated people feel after a war. He knew his Confederate ancestors carried hate in their hearts all their lives. He knew that Germany's anger after World War I had helped bring about a Second World War. So he supported a plan that would send billions of dollars in aid and assistance to our allies and to our former enemies. It was called the Marshall Plan, named for Secretary of State George C. Marshall, who introduced the idea in a speech at Harvard College. But it reflected President Truman's thoughts. After a terrible war, he was asking the winning nation to help everyone recover, including the losers. The president said, "You can't be vindictive after a war. You have to be generous. You have to help people get back on their feet. Vindictive means you're out for revenge." Marshall Plan aid was very concrete. That's a pun. U.S. money rebuilt steel mills in Belgium, ceramics factories in France, railroads in Germany, and bridges and buildings in a whole lot of places. Marshall Plan aid was offered to all of Europe's nations, including the Soviet Union and those countries under Soviet control. The Soviet nations refused the aid. 16 nations accepted with enthusiasm. It was very expensive. It was very unselfish. The plan encouraged Europeans to use American aid and add their own brains and know-how. It worked. Prosperity began returning to the free nations of Europe. It also helped us. Those newly prosperous European nations now had money to buy Americans' goods, and they did. In East Asia, General Douglas MacArthur was sent to defeated Japan as head of an occupation army. The U.S. was determined to rid Japan of its war leaders and bring democracy, freedom, and prosperity to that nation. The Japanese wrote a new constitution. It made Japan a democracy. Land was redistributed so that more people could have it. Before, there had been a few huge owners and many poor farmers. Now there was a better balance. Soon there would be great prosperity. Women were allowed to vote. 39 women were elected to Japan's Congress called the Diet. Secret political societies were prohibited, and religious discrimination was ended. The United States poured aid into Japan: food, clothing, medicines, and other supplies. Ancient temples and museums were restored. We were very generous. No nation had ever done that kind of thing for a defeated foe. Another Truman Plan, called Point 4, gave aid to developing nations. Developing nations are also called third world nations. These countries are less wealthy and less modern than the industrial nations. Many developing nations are in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Did everyone approve of these generous policies? Not at all. Some people in Europe and Asia said they didn't want to take aid from America. They thought we wanted something in return. Some people in Congress yelled about all the money it was costing. Why should we help others, they asked. Why should we help our former enemies, they screamed. In January 1946, the First General Assembly of the United Nations met in London, England. Secretary of State James F. Burns headed the U.S. delegation, which included Eleanor Roosevelt, widow of the former president. In October, the General Assembly accepted a gift from John D. Rockefeller Jr. to pay for a UN headquarters site in New York City. People also screamed when President Truman decided to do something to help people in the United States. He decided it was time to do something about civil rights, especially about lynchings and segregation. The Army, Navy, and Air Force were all segregated. Blacks and whites served in separate units. Blacks got the worst jobs. That wasn't fair. Like other Americans, they were willing to fight for their country. Why would they be treated differently? In Mississippi, when some black soldiers returned home, they were dumped from Army trucks and then beaten. In Georgia, a black man was shot and killed because he had voted. When Truman heard of those outrages, he was horrified. He sent proposals to Congress to stop lynchings and to outlaw the poll tax that kept some people, mostly blacks, from voting. He ordered an end to segregation in the armed services, and he created a commission on civil rights. People infected with prejudice and hate began to howl. A Florida county commission said the president's program was obnoxious, repugnant, odious, detestable, loathsome, repulsive, revolting, and humiliating. A Mississippi congressman said Truman had run a political dagger into our backs, and now he is trying to drink our blood. A lynching is an outside the law execution.